making the wrong show. For 5 years, I've been making travel guides on my personal blog called Rambling Adventurista, sharing travel articles about my trips, my experiences living abroad, and advising on how to see a place with the least amount of friction as possible as a tourist. Then last year, I started building an app around cultural travel, and this podcast grew out of that. I told you to travel like a local instead of a tourist, to learn the local language, to skip the influencer itineraries, and to sit with a place instead of collecting just another stamp in your passport. The goal was to immerse yourself more deeply into the local culture and to return home with growth. Now, I still agree with a few of those suggestions, but I never once asked the actual questions underneath all of them. Why do any of us need to leave home to feel something in the first place? Who are we when we're in a location where no one knows our name? Or who do we become in these situations? Why do we even travel in the first place? Those are the questions this show was circling around, but never fully landing on. So today I'm changing it. Allow me to explain. Here's what I mean. Travel like a local, not a tourist, is good advice as a general level, but it's just advice about a travel technique. Where to eat, who to talk to, how to immerse locally. It never actually explains why the technique matters or what's happening inside a person while they're immersing. It tells you what to do differently in Lisbon. It doesn't tell you why you came back from Lisbon a slightly different person than the one who left. It doesn't tell you why you still think about a conversation that you had with a stranger in a local market in Serbia more than you think about who you talk to every day of the week. And it definitely doesn't tell you why you don't quite fit into your own routine for a few weeks after you get home, or maybe never. That breakup and processing that comes back once you return home. You know, the one where you're supposed to just return to normal in our normal lives as if we didn't just have an amazing trip with deeper growth. That gap between what to do and what it's actually doing to you, that's the real subject. And it's where the whole travel category is thin and not even scraping the surface. Some of my more recent episodes were already leaning into that direction, but I kept trying to force them into destination-shaped content. 3 years ago, I took a risk. I left my job and moved to a small town in Moldova on a Fulbright English teaching assistant grant, completely into the unknown. Within 2 months, I was fluent in Romanian, not because I'm especially good at languages, which I may have a few good tricks, but because I stopped observing the culture and started living within it. I did the same thing 2 years later in Malang, Indonesia. Different language, same result. But something changed both times that had nothing to do with vocabulary and language. I came back able to sit with silence differently. I came back noticing what I used to just walk past on a daily basis. I came back different and grown. If you've been listening to the show for a while, you've already heard this thesis. You just didn't know that's what it was. The episode on the loneliness paradox, how you can be the most surrounded you've ever been mid-trip and still feel completely alone. That was this. The one on performative travel, what happens when documenting a place quietly replaces the experiences it's supposed to be capturing? Also this. Passport privilege. How unevenly the world hands out even the freedom to ask these questions at all. Same thread. Every one of those was really about one thing. What travel does to memory, to identity, to how present a person is even capable of being. Those were not about the places. They were about the psychology underneath the places. I kept calling all this cultural travel content because that's genuinely what resonated with my own experiences and the closest definition that I could find to explain the concept that I was trying to reach and explain. But it was never really cultural travel only. And here's the other complication I kept running into. I started noticing more and more of these big travel companies rolling out local experience packages, learn the local language, eat what locals eat, avoid the tourist zone, live like a local, sold as a tour add-on now. I even came across this while planning my most recent upcoming trip, which really caused me to pause and take a step back. But it also tells you something, that these experiences are better than the top 10 photo spots And the travel industry is acknowledging the shift from consumers into looking for those more authentic and immersive experiences. But it's still a list. It still answers where and how, dressed up as depth. It's now creating another cookie cutter stage tourist experience to remain at the surface level of travel. It still isn't even asking why any of this does something to us in the first place. That's the actual content. That's what this show is becoming, not cultural travel. Modern travel psychology, using travel as a lens for analysis and example, because it happens to be one of the sharpest, most honest windows we have into memory, identity, and who we become when nobody who's ever met us is in the room. Travel is the evidence. It was never the main subject. So here's what that actually means starting now. Every episode is shifting to becoming one essay, and it's going to sit in one of three places. One option is travel psychology, examining why some trips change you and some don't, why you remember places longer than the people you shared them with, what's actually going on in your head before, during, and after a trip. The second category is modern travel critique. What algorithms and influencer culture are quietly doing to how we experience anywhere, why every trip on your feed is starting to look identical. And we can't forget about the impact of AI on the travel industry and travel experiences. But these are all basically the type of tech questions that we're finally beginning to see people begin to ask, but yet still only on the surface level. The last one is a little bit more broad, but it's really about identity abroad and who you become somewhere when nobody knows your name. Why does coming home not always feel like coming home? What 2 months in a place can do to you that 2 years at home can't? That's the identity we're talking about. No itineraries, no top 10 things to do. If that's what you're looking for, then this is not the right show for you anymore. And honestly, I don't think it ever fully was. If you've been here since the beginning, thank you for sticking with me through 50 plus episodes and hundreds of travel articles and videos while figuring out how to name this correctly and to define what Put the Guidebook Down really is. If you're new, welcome. You're getting the version of the show I actually meant to make from the very beginning. So here's what I want to leave you with. Instead of a preview for next week's episode, maybe some homework, we're going to keep that tradition, but go into the memory archives and recall a place you still think about often, maybe more than you think you should, and ask yourself honestly, why does this place or moment come to mind so often? Or maybe the better question, who were you in that moment? My name is Kiara. I am your host, and it's time to put the guidebook down and actually ask why. I'll see you in the next episode.